Hello, I'm going to be giving part one of a talk about the Manifesto for European Video Games. And we're going to be dealing with the part which is about foundational statements to begin with here. My name is Dr. Matt Haggis. I'm from NHTV, Breda University of Applied Sciences. I do talk a little bit fast, but all of the main bits are going to be on the slides behind me, so hopefully it's going to be easy for you to keep up as I go through this. So quick little bits about Gaming Horizons, if this is the first talk that you're hearing about the background of this. I'm talking about the Manifesto for European Video Games. It's the final publication of the Gaming Horizons research project here. The project lasted over a year and it involved a thorough review of European policy documents, a systematic review of non-academic and academic papers about video games, and running multiple workshops to gather information and test some of the outcomes that we had here, and over 80 interviews and more. There were many other things that it did. This was a very busy project packed into 14 months here with some really great research outcomes. The results are very extensive reports about European Union policy, academia, video interviews with a wide range of games developers. We had scenarios looking at different possibilities for the outcomes of this and help really imagine the future of video games development. And like I say, many more things. You can see more of these on gaminghorizons.eu, so do check out the website if you're interested in following up from this after that you've watched this talk today. One of the culmination points of this work is this manifesto. So, we interviewed a variety of stakeholders in video games. We had EU policymakers, we had games developers, we had teachers and students, players and their families, and researchers. Many groups were just talked with to look at the kind of ideas of content creation and culture surrounding video games. The goal of the project was to assess how well the current systems of funding video game development and research are really aligned with the goals of the EU. These goals, put simply, are to support the economic, political and cultural health of Europe. So, the manifesto itself is written by myself as the lead author with a variety of people from the team. Here we had academic backgrounds and we had also industry backgrounds involved with this manifesto. Full names are on the slide behind me here. Manifesto has two main sections for it. We have the foundational statements, which I'll be talking about in this little video, in this little talk here, and the actions, which are going to be in part two of this video. The 5 foundational statements are observations based on our research that are solid grounds to base future game policy. A manifesto, of course, seeks change. This is what manifestos are for. That's what they are always demanding. Now, some of the statements in here today are actually going to go against some of the implied underpinnings of current policy, which is why we also have the 9 actions, the steps that can be taken to address this mismatch between kind of the intention and the outcomes of current European policies for video games. So really looking at kind of where we stand, what we've established from our research, and then really looking to see what we can do to build a more positive, constructive future for this. Of course, who is this manifesto for? I mean, there's going to be a lot of policy discussion here, but the implications impact on developers, on players, educators, and many more people. Many roles in society are actually impacted by this manifesto. Video games are played by a broad cross-section of European and global society, so I think understanding their role in our lives is very, very important. The foundational statements may act as a starting point for discussion about funding, for research and education, and for cultural expansion. So if you are a stakeholder with any element of interest in these things, the foundational statements could be used to back up your argument and your discussions when you address funding bodies. We're going to target policy, but I think the manifesto works for many other social actors. Of course, why do we even need this to start off with? Millions of Europeans are turning to video games every day for leisure and entertainment, and games are increasingly being used actively in classrooms across Europe to teach a broad range of subjects. The mandate of Gaming Horizons research project was to critically challenge the status quo in how video games are perceived and potentially to foment change, to hopefully get them used in different ways, seen in different ways by society. Such a change, I think, is to recognise that all types of video games are already changing the political, economic and cultural systems of Europe in exactly the same way as the European Union intended us to. So to bring about change, there needs to be an agreement on the location from which we start. And so we have to begin with the 5 foundational statements. So foundational statement number 1, playfulness is a primary, unintentional and atavistic route to learning. What do we mean by this? Playing is an action through which we engage and learn about ourselves and the world around us. This is how we learn, this is how we structure our lives, this is how we progress in our knowledge of ourselves. Modern education still needs to provide a foundation of knowledge. We still need to have some base there. But an urgent need really is the skill of interpretation, understanding context, evaluating the worthiness of an answer, and finding the right questions. In a data-rich society, we need to understand how to use data, how to navigate it, and how to get through these things. In this manifesto, we assert that playing is intertwined with learning. It always has been intertwined with learning, and that interactive media is returning us to an active state of engagement with learning materials in a playful manner. It's a way of engaging with new systems of learning. Embracing our playful nature may be the only method of surviving a tide of information that flows both around us and will be flowing around future generations. We need to have a playful attitude towards data. Foundational statement number 2. All video games can improve or harm the lives of players, regardless of type or authorial intentionality. Let's talk about that one. In Gaming Horizons, we have repeatedly found that players, developers, educators, researchers, and policymakers have doubts about the motivating power or of intentionally didactic games and their capacity to meet expectations. By didactic, we mean games that teach, games that train. This was something that was expressed from a lot of different stakeholder groups there. At the same time, we have encountered transformative pro-social impacts of video games, even those that on the surface appear to be antisocial in their themes and interactions. This is not to say that didactic games cannot teach. It's not to say that entertainment games are better. This is to say that the boundaries are not as clear as they might seem to be, and that outcomes can be mixed, pro-social and antisocial, depending on what the context is and who the player is. The range and effectiveness of positive changes that can flow from playing such games is the lived reality of players today, and currently it's largely ignored by the worlds of research and policy making. This variety and scope of outcomes from video games is something that policy makers are currently not actually accessing fully in the works that we have reviewed during the Gaming Horizons research project. Foundational statement number 3. Playing for its own sake is a worthwhile activity. So statement number 1 emphasised the importance of playing for learning, and statement number 2 further examined the transformative power of games. However, while keeping that potential in mind, we should not conceptualise these as the end goal of gaming. This idea of learning, this idea of transformation, that is not only what games are about. This manifesto should not be understood as a neoliberal call to instrumentalise a play into a quantified value. This is a deeply flawed idea. Seeing games as only valuable when they're instruments of learning or as on-ramps to economic production and not as artistic or cultural artefacts strips them of their wider worth for players and society. I cannot emphasise enough how much this instrumentalisation of games could be problematic to holding them back in their future and holding back their European Union potential. All types of video games are already part of a wider discourse of our self-reflexive society. Again, what do we mean by this? Games, like other media, offer insights into who we are. Every action and choice made by a person is in some way a reflection of their social context or personal history. You cannot consider an idea which is impossible to consider within your society. All the things we do express the boundaries around us and are explorations of those boundaries that we exist in. Many actions which appear or are claimed to be apolitical are instead made in support of dominant discourses of society, and actions of rebellion are counterpoised to social norms. This is a thing where things seem apolitical, it just means that it's supporting the status quo. Many games have intentionally avoided overt political statement, and in doing so have unintentionally reinforced the orthodoxy of mainstream culture, but some have embraced it, some have been political by their nature. We can think of examples such as Grand Theft Auto, which is frequently imbued with social satire and looking at corporate culture. We can look at games such as Sonic the Hedgehog from the 1990s, with its deeply laden messages of environmentalism and awareness of industrial destruction of the environment, laid into extremely fun, playful games. The question is not whether we need to take games seriously as cultural artefacts, but when we will choose to begin doing so. They are already cultural artefacts. We just have to recognise this and start working with them in that way. So, foundational statement number 5. All video games combine the social sciences and humanities with technology and innovation. Where foundational statement 4 addresses the significance of culture and content in video games, statement 5 really refers to the processes by which games are created. Across Europe, the higher education courses for games developers award degrees in variously the arts, the sciences, in engineering. There's very little actual agreement in what the video game course actually is. These are different across nations, and they're different even within regions inside nations. Countries cannot agree on what these are in a single bucket, which is a problem. The reality is that the creation of video games involves the collaboration of a wide variety of skills to create the whole. If European Union policy continues to view games primarily as the outcome of engineering processes, then we're going to result in this mismatch with the priorities of the industry, and that may end up resulting in current and future restrictions on growth of the industry. We saw repeatedly within the EU policy calls that games are looked at as engineering processes, as ideas of manifestations of technology, really with very little interest in the social sciences and humanities sides of this. So the foundational statement number 5 is really about addressing this lack of acknowledgement of the impact that social sciences and the humanities have on the technology sector that is seen as being video games currently. So that's the 5 foundational statements there. With these statements, this manifesto intends to consciously situate video games as a nexus of technological and social sciences. They are this amalgam of both of these. It's not a call to change what they already are, but instead it's a recognition and restatement of the often unacknowledged position that they already occupy. This is not about changing games. This is what they currently are, what they are right now. However, as stated before, Manifesto seeks change. We want something to be different. The outcomes of the Game Horizons project suggest that 9 actions will strengthen and support the growth of European video games culture as a medium with an impact on politics, the economy, and culture. The foundational statements are about the present, and in the next video I'll be presenting the Manifesto's actions for the future. If you'd like to read more about the full Manifesto, it can be found on gaminghorizons.eu. I hope you liked this video, and I hope you'll watch for the next one. But for the moment, thank you very much for listening. Thank you, everybody.